Good afternoon, everyone. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dr. Julio La Torre. I'm a physician board certified in internal medicine, current UCLA Biodesign Fellow, and co-founder of Airosolve. And we are creating the first automated oxygen therapy platform in the United States that will revolutionize the way we deliver oxygen in the hospital and in turn create a $3 billion market opportunity for investors. So if you're to get sick and go to the hospital, there's a good chance you'll likely receive oxygen while you're there. There's a good chance you'll receive oxygen while you're there. Currently, 30% of patients in the hospital receive oxygen, which translates to about 10 million patients per year. Oxygen therapy has been around for well over a century. The process for adjusting and monitoring oxygen levels hasn't changed much since. It's still a manual trial and error process, and it's very inefficient. It takes about 5 to 10 minutes. So nurses tend to do this only about once per day. And because of this, patients tend to get too much oxygen. As you can see, according to this study, 84% of patients are actually above the oxygen range, the desired oxygen range, which doesn't sound that bad on the surface, given what we know, just how important vital oxygen is to life. But there is too much, such thing as too much of a good thing, because this is actually very, very dangerous. So there was a big study done in the Lancet Journal in 2019 that showed that patients who get too much oxygen that are above the oxygen range are at a 21% increased risk death compared to those who are within the target range. If you remember, 84% of patients are actually getting too much oxygen. So there's millions of patients at risk unnecessarily. So we started Airosolve to solve this problem by creating the first automatic oxygen therapy platform in the United States that's designed to give patients just the right amount of oxygen they need, no more, no less. The Airosolve platform will consist of our patent pending device connected to a continuous software solution. It will adapt right into the existing hospital infrastructure, monitors, and pulse oximeters. In practice, a team member, a physician usually, will set the desired oxygen saturation range. The device will take over from there, continuously adjusting the oxygen flow rate so that the patient maintains within that desired oxygen saturation range. Our first target patient population will be COPD. We're picking this because these particular patients are even more prone to the dangers of excessive oxygenation. It's shown that their increased risk of death is threefold compared to those when they are within the desired oxygen range. So for COPD patients in the average hospital, we plan to prevent 3 to 8 deaths per 100 hospitalizations, decrease their length of stay by 2 days, and save the hospital system about $1.4 million. As mentioned, we are starting with patients from COPD, but going to expand quickly to all patients who are receiving oxygen in the hospital, and then eventually those who get oxygen outside of the hospital, including those who get oxygen with home health and skilled nursing facilities. So we have, I think, the best team, I think, designed to tackle this problem. As you can see, there are 3 clinicians on the team, but I think it's a little bit more than that on the surface. For instance, my colleague, Dr. Richard Seto, who's here today, has 10 years of industry experience. He worked as a design engineer for Abbott Vascular prior to going to medical school. We are seeking $750,000 in funding to get our prototype to medical grade device. And I know I am out of time, so please, let's go straight to the questions. Thank you.
Yeah, so Julio, great presentation. Love that you started off with a need. Can you elaborate a little bit in terms of, I find it hard to believe that, is it 1 to 3 patients per 100 die because they have too much oxygenation?
Which one was it?
Or maybe 3 to 8? Yeah, this one.
Yeah. So this is actually, there's some robust evidence for this. So this is for COPD patients. So there was a study that I mentioned before that was with all patients, but there's been studies, it's called the GOLD criteria. So they're more prone to oxygen toxicity just based on their pathology. So there've been studies that show that whenever they're outside the oxygen saturation range, their increased mortality increased by 3-fold compared to those who are within the oxygen saturation range. Just using those studies, because there have been studies that show whenever you carefully control the oxygen level in a patient, and you keep them within that desired range, it improves outcomes. But the thing is, it's not really possible to, it's not very possible to do this in a hospital system because it requires a lot of labor. So we're just using those numbers and extrapolating that if we can automate the process, you essentially are able to get through to the desired range.
So first of all, great presentation. Loved it. This hospital savings number you talk about, can you just walk a little bit through the cost structure? So what does it cost to install this in a hospital? And then that savings, how much of that is oxygen? How much is labor? How much is additional costs?
Yeah, so let me just give, so as far as the savings, I don't know how much, I can have a couple of slides there. So hospitals, they get reimbursed, and this is kind of a simplistic thing. It's called the disease related group. So let's say a patient that has COPD, they're admitted, the hospital gets one payment, and they are essentially incentivized to get the patient out of the hospital sooner than later. So I think in this particular example, a 6-day hospitalization is going to be reimbursed the same as a 4-day. And there are some, it changes a little bit by area, but that's kind of where we're hoping to save the hospitals the most money is by decreasing their length of stay. And as far as cost structure within the hospital, we haven't, so a lot of, right now we're still kind of in initial prototyping phase. We're doing our hardware and right now. I think a lot of the cost structure is going to be on like IT and putting this into the existing infrastructure, being able to collect the data from the monitors and from the pulse oximetry. So it's going to be a large cost, but particularly at first, because not every hospital is created equal. There's different monitors. So being able to get the data from each particular monitor is going to be a huge focus for the first couple of years of the company.
Just 3 quick questions. Is there a requirement to have a physician input into the device? Is there a regulatory requirement for that? And then, sorry, 2 more quick questions. The $750K, what you're planning to do with the money, what inflection you get to, and then is there anything like this in the market, or are there competitors?
Sure, absolutely. So as far as a physician needing to do it, yes, the physician will be the one to input the points, which is actually better than what we do now. Actually, it's just kind of, we just throw oxygen on them. Their oxygen saturation is good. People are more scared about patients getting too low of oxygen. So right now, it's sometimes a physician will say, hey, keep them at this range, but even then, that's like rarely the case. In our particular product, that's going to be, the physician's going to be the one that puts the desired oxygen saturation range, because physicians do have their preferences. And when it's COPD, particularly, there are pretty strict guidelines. Yeah, and then second question was,
what you're going to do with the slide that you had with the money, and also if there are competitors. Like in terms of inflection point.
Yeah, so we're asking for $750,000. It's going to be to essentially get our prototype to a medical grade device. It's going to include regulatory consultants, working with the FDA, the Q submission, and doing also clinical simulations with our data and our algorithms.
And if there are competitors.
Yeah, so competitors, this is actually a very new field. Our competitors are early stage and they're overseas. I can take you to them. One of them is called O2matic and one of them is called oxygenation. They're still in early stage. You can see that's the funding up there. They got about $1 to $3 million in funding a piece. They're relatively like non-differentiated products. So as you can see, they're essentially kind of they're the monitor. They're vertically integrated. They have their own monitors. They have their own pulse ox, which I think might work well out in Europe where they're based. But I think it's a little redundant. So ours is, our main differentiation between them is that we're going to get the existing data from the actual monitors right now, compared to these companies.
So going back to the cost, you mentioned it briefly. What do you think is going to cost the hospital to implement this? And you said not all hospitals are created equal. So where's the sweet spot in terms of size for that product? Are we talking about UCLA hospital system size or something much smaller? Something
around like 200 bed. That's even most of our numbers we're running it, because like I said, there's not hospitals created equal. We're proposing, and still I don't have definitive numbers on this yet. It's going to be very expensive, particularly the first couple of cases. Our go-to-market plan right now is essentially just to beta test at 1 or 2 sites, and really learn about the system, make all our mistakes as far as implementing. and getting the feedback from the stakeholders, because once again, the stakeholders are really big here. If they don't use the platform goes nowhere. And essentially just try to optimize it at that so we can get our metrics to go out and go to market and hopefully get some kind of economies of scale there too, as we learn from those two sites.
What does the regulatory pathway look like for something like this in order to get those type of labeling claims?
Yeah, so we're going for a class 2. We do have a predicate device. It's the Hamilton C1 ventilator, which has an automated mode. So it delivers high flow oxygen and mechanical ventilation, which are just completely different deliveries of oxygen. So they're used for more critical patients. So it's not necessarily a competitor, but we're using them as a predicate.
In terms of making the device, what do you project would be the unit price? And in terms of business model, let's say it's not an exit like you get acquired, but it becomes an actual business where you're selling devices. Have you thought through in terms of reimbursements what that would look like?
Yeah, so the reimbursements is going to be by the hospital. They're going to be the primary payer. I do have somewhat of a business model right now. So right now we're picturing a subscription-based platform. It's going to be $5,000 per device per year. We've kind of fought between this and having, so this is based on the hypothetical, let's say a 200-bed hospital, you create about a $1.5 million savings. This is going to be a novel thing. So it's really hard, I think, for hospitals to digest a big number up front. The situation that we're envisioning is that we're going to come at a lower cost. They can get a few devices if they like it, which, I'm a hospitalist. I see this every day. And if I have a device like this, and I know it works and it's easy to use, it's, there's no friction on it. And I order and I am not able to use it on the patient, I'm going to start pressuring administration to start ordering more. And I think that's the bet we're making, that we're going to have a product that the stakeholders like. They're going to want to order more devices. And then after that, because at first, if it's just a few devices, it doesn't really do well for revenue. But if they order enough to, carry, let's say, hypothetically, all patients have oxygen, the revenue starts becoming in our favor.
On the tech side, do you know if it's actually possible to not vertically integrate? I thought it was hard to get other people's data out of their devices, like an SpO2 signal into your device.
Yeah, so there's a lot of companies doing this now. So this is what we've been trying to figure out, is do we vertically integrate? I think so. What we found out, there are actually companies that are doing this right now. There's one called SickBay out of Texas, and one called Connects All. They're essentially doing this. They're able to get the hospital owns the data. So they're able to extract. So for instance, I'll take SickBay for an example. They are essentially extract all the data from all the monitors in the hospital, and they kind of have this command center that you can see everyone's vitals on the screen. You're able to do whatever with the data. So the hospital owns that data, and one of the ways that this is recorded, right? I guess. So their company, I'm familiar with that company for a reason. So essentially, the hospital do own the data. So working with a hospital that has this particular SickBay, we can leverage that data because a lot of the work's already done. If not, there's also it's a tough solution, but it's possible. So to get the data. So. Thanks.